The first thing High Matron Vrail checked every morning was the cradles. Not the temperature gauges, not the feeding logs, not the growth charts pinned beside the door. The cradles first, 3 heated stone bowls carved from volcanic rock brought aboard the Sovereign Ember when the ship was first commissioned 200 years ago, each one wide enough to hold a hatchling with room for a curled tail. She checked them because they were the point of everything. The royal bloodline rested in those cradles. The future of the Dracavari Empire slept in those cradles. And so, every morning, Vrail walked to each one, counted the small sleeping forms, and only then allowed herself to breathe. That morning, she counted 1. Sierra, silver-scaled, tucked into the far left cradle, one wing folded over her snout, sleeping fine. The middle cradle, Rin's cradle, was empty. The right cradle, Bolt's, was empty too. The thermal stones were still warm. The sleeping moss was pressed down in the shape of 2 small bodies. They had not been gone long. Vrail did not raise her voice. She had lived long enough to know that raised voices in a crisis only made everyone slower. She walked to the corridor, pressed her claw to the wall panel, and spoke 2 words into the ship's internal line. "They're gone." Commander Ossel had 40 guards moving within 3 minutes. The Sovereign Ember was a massive ship, city-sized, carrying the full Imperial court between star systems, but the residential spire had only so many corridors, and hatchlings were not fast. They were barely 3 months old. They could not fly yet. Their fire sacs were not even developed. What they could do, apparently, was walk, and apparently they had. Ossel split his teams by deck. Sublevels first, then the upper rings. He checked every room with a heat signature, every corner with a thermal scanner. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Ossel was beginning to run through worse possibilities in his head when his junior officer, a young soldier named Daya, called in from sublevel 9. "Commander, I found them." Ossel arrived to a strange sight. The maintenance corridor on sublevel 9 was narrow and poorly lit, lined with pipe housings and labeled storage crates. It smelled of cleaning solution and warm metal. Sitting against the left wall, his back against a pipe housing, was the human sanitation worker, Darrow Sol, the ship's janitor on night rotation. His legs were stretched out. His mop was leaning beside him at a slight angle. His thermos sat on the floor near his right hand. He was asleep. Rin was curled across both his knees, copper scales catching the low yellow light of the corridor lamps. Bolt was pressed against his left hip, tucked under the edge of his work jacket, the tip of a small blue tail sticking out near the hem. Both hatchlings were deeply, completely, peacefully asleep. Darrow's head was tipped back against the pipe housing, mouth slightly open, breathing slow. He had not heard anyone arrive. Daya cleared his throat. Darrow woke with a sharp jerk and immediately knocked over his thermos. He grabbed it, looked up, saw the guard, looked down at his lap and said, "Oh no." He said it the way a person says something when they have done something completely by accident and are still not sure what it was. Ossel crouched to his eye level. "How long has this been happening?" Darrow rubbed his face. "This is the first time, I swear. I sat down for a break around, I don't know, maybe past midnight. I had my thermos. I was going to rest for 10 minutes, and then they were just..." He gestured helplessly at his lap. "I didn't want to move suddenly. I thought I would wait until they woke up, and then He looked at his thermos. "I fell asleep too, I'm sorry." Ossel looked at the 2 hatchlings. Rin had not moved. Bolt's tail twitched once and was still. He stood. "Can you stand up without waking them?" Darrow tried. Rin made a sound, low, rumbling, unhappy, and Darrow stopped moving immediately. The hatchlings settled again. It took 12 minutes to lift both hatchlings off him without waking them, passing them to guards trained in royal handling. By the time they were done, Darrow's legs had gone numb from sitting still so long, and he had to use the mop handle to help himself up. Vrail arrived just as he was getting to his feet. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they do not have a word for yet. Darrow said, "I'm really sorry. I don't know how they found me." Vrail said nothing. She turned and followed the guards carrying the hatchlings back to the nursery. Ossel filed the report. Security footage was pulled. The seal on the nursery door had been bypassed, not forced, not broken, bypassed. Something had pressed the release mechanism from the inside, something with very small claws. The seal was upgraded that evening. Darrow was formally warned and sent back to his shift. That night, his colleague Dr. Len Ware knocked on the door of his quarters, holding 2 cups of something hot. She handed him one and leaned against the doorframe. "You know," she said, "in Dracavari tradition, when a hatchling seeks out a non-family adult on its own, it's considered a significant event." Darrow looked into his cup. "I wasn't doing anything." "I know," she said, "that might be the whole point." He didn't answer. Down the corridor, the ship moved silently through the dark between stars. 3 days passed without incident, and Vrail allowed herself to believe it was over. The new seal on the nursery door was a dual-lock magnetic system, the kind used on the ship's weapons storage. It required 2 simultaneous inputs, one from the outside panel, one from the guard station 3 meters down the hall. No single person could open it alone, and certainly no hatchling could trigger both inputs at once. The technician who installed it told her it was, in his exact words, physically impossible to open from the inside without tools. She posted 2 guards inside the nursery at night anyway, just inside the door where they could watch the cradles directly. On the morning of the 4th day, she walked in for her check. One guard was asleep in his chair. The other was standing with his arms crossed, awake, watching the empty cradles with the expression of a person who has been standing in exactly that spot since the moment he realized something was wrong and did not know what to do about it. "How long?" Vrail asked. "I found them empty an hour ago," the guard said. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." Vrail turned around and walked directly to sublevel 9. She arrived before Ossel this time. She wanted to see it herself before anyone could arrange or explain or soften it. She turned the corner into the maintenance corridor, and there was Darrow Sull. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the corridor with a small crate of cleaning supplies open beside him. He had a clipboard on his knee and was working through a supply inventory, making small marks with a pen. He was talking quietly while he worked, not to anyone in particular, just murmuring, the way people do when they are concentrating. Rin was draped across his thighs, head resting on one knee, eyes half open and glazed with the particular look of something that is not quite asleep and not quite awake, but is entirely comfortable. The copper scales on her back rose and fell slowly. Sierra had coiled herself around Darrow's left forearm and was studying his hand with intense focus. Every time he made a mark on the clipboard, her eyes tracked the pen. When he set it down, she reached out and touched it with the tip of one claw, then looked at his face, then touched it again. Bolt was sitting upright on Darrow's boot, just sitting there, perfectly still, staring up at him with the serious expression that small creatures sometimes have when they have decided that a thing is important. Darrow had not seen Vrail yet. "Okay," he was saying quietly, still looking at his clipboard. 17 floor solvents, that's 3 short. Someone's been taking from the supply without logging it again." He made a mark. "We're also out of the good filter brushes, the ones that actually fit the vents on this level. I've put in for them 4 times. He sighed. 4 times. Sierra tapped his hand with her claw again. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "I know, not your problem." Vrail stepped back around the corner before he saw her. She stood in the side corridor for a long moment, listening to him continue his inventory in a low, even voice. She could hear Rin make a soft sound, a rumble, almost like a purr. She had never heard Rin make that sound in the nursery, not once in 3 months. Ossel arrived at a half-run and found her standing still in the corridor, not looking at anything. "Hi, matron," he said. "Go see for yourself," she said, quietly. He went. He came back 60 seconds later. "How did they get out?" Vrail asked. Ossel pulled up the security footage on his handheld. He had already reviewed it on the walkover. He turned the screen toward her. The footage showed the nursery from overhead, the guards in their positions, the hatchlings in the cradles. Then, at 2:10, Rin climbed out of her cradle. She went to the back wall, not the door. She pressed herself against the floor and disappeared into a gap near the base of the ventilation intake, a gap smaller than Vrail's fist. She was gone for 4 minutes. Then the gap pushed outward. She had found the release latch on the inside of the panel. She pulled it fully open. Bolt followed. Then they went back for Sierra, and the three of them disappeared into the maintenance shaft. They planned it, Ossel said. The footage from 2 days ago shows her checking that gap, testing the panel. She found the shaft on her own and came back for the others. Vrail looked at the screen for a long time. She is 3 months old. Yes. They are all 3 months old. Yes. She handed the screen back to him. Where does the shaft connect to sublevel 9? About 40 meters from where Sol usually takes his mid-shift break. Vrail closed her eyes briefly. Did they follow him, or did they already know where he would be? Ossel said nothing, because he did not have a good answer. Darrow was brought out of the corridor apologetically, looking confused and sorry in equal measure. The hatchlings were collected by the nursery staff. Rin was the last to go. She held onto Darrow's sleeve with both front claws for a moment before the handler gently lifted her free. Darrow watched them go. Then he picked up his clipboard, sighed, and went back to counting solvents. That evening, Ossel found Len Ware in the science corridor and told her what the footage showed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 3-month-old hatchlings do not plan. They don't hold memory across multiple days like that. They don't coordinate. I know, Ossel said. So either our developmental charts are wrong, she said slowly, or something is accelerating them. They both thought about that. I'd like to formally request observation access, Len said, starting tomorrow. Ossel nodded. He went to file the paperwork, and neither of them said the obvious thing, which was that the only variable that had changed in the past 4 days was a janitor sitting on a corridor floor with a thermos and a clipboard. Len spent the first day just watching. She sat in the observation alcove above the nursery, a small room with a clear floor panel that looked directly down into the chamber below. She had a notebook, a cup of cold tea she kept forgetting to drink, and no agenda beyond seeing what there was to see. The nursery itself was beautiful by any standard, heated stone floors, glowing moss along the walls. The temperature held at exactly the level recommended for early Dracavari development. Enrichment objects had been placed in careful arrangement, carved shapes in different textures, hanging things that moved, a shallow water feature that caught the light. The 3 nursery attendants rotated shifts, each one formally trained, each one carrying the proper credentials. The hatchlings ignored all of it. Rin paced. She moved along the base of the wall in slow circuits, pressing her nose to the stone every few steps, checking the same spots she had already checked a dozen times. Bolt sat in the middle of the room and watched the door. Sierra lay in her cradle but did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling. None of them ate. The attendants offered food twice during the morning, fresh protein paste, the correct temperature, the correct formula. Rin sniffed it once and walked away. Bolt did not approach at all. Sierra looked at the bowl with her head tilted, as if she had forgotten what it was for. Len wrote down everything and kept her expression neutral. That evening she went to the ship's archive and pulled every text she could find on Dracavari hatchling behavior. Most of it was clinical, development charts, weight milestones, vocalization tables, standard material, formal and dry. She moved through it quickly, looking for something older. She found it near the back of the archive catalog, filed under historical documentation rather than medical sciences. A collection of pre-imperial texts, writings from before the Dracavari had built their fleet, when they still lived in mountain ranges and high plateaus on their home world. The language was old, and she had to use the translation program twice on some passages. But the meaning was clear. Before the Empire, hatchling care had not been a formal profession. It had not involved trained attendants or enrichment objects or regulated temperature schedules. In the old way, a hatchling was placed with the adult who had demonstrated the most important quality, not strength, not rank, not bloodline. The text used a word that translated, roughly, as steadiness, the state of being calm not because nothing is wrong, but because you have decided that the small creature in front of you is more important than your own discomfort. An adult who would stop what they were doing, without resentment, and simply be present. An adult who did not need the hatchling to perform, or thrive, or prove anything. One who would wait. The hatchlings chose that adult themselves. The adults did not apply. They were not selected by committee or trained for the role. The hatchlings found them by instinct, in the way that very young things find what they need before language or thought can interfere. The Empire had decided this was inefficient. It had built a system instead. Len sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The next day, Vrail informed her that Darrow had been reassigned, a personnel decision moving him to the outer hull maintenance rotation, as far from the nursery level as the ship's staffing allowed. The reasoning given was minimizing disruption to nursery protocol. Len noted it in her notebook without comment. On the third morning after the reassignment, Len arrived at the observation alcove to find the attendants standing in a tight cluster near the door, speaking in low voices. She pressed her face to the floor panel and looked down. The hatchlings had not touched their food in 2 days. She could see that clearly, the bowls still full, still in position from the morning before. Rin had stopped packing. She was lying flat on the floor near the wall, head on her forefeet, eyes open but not tracking anything. Bolt had his back pressed against Rin's side. Sierra was still in her cradle but had curled herself into a tight ball, her wing pulled over her face. The room was very quiet. One of the attendants was running a scanner over each hatchling in turn. Len watched her check the readings, check them again, and then stand there holding the scanner without moving. Len went downstairs. She found Ossel in the corridor, outside the nursery door. "How long since they ate anything?" she asked. 2.5 days, he said. "They had a small amount on the first day of the reassignment, nothing since." "And before?" "Before they were eating normally, better than the charts expected, actually." Len looked through the narrow window in the nursery door. The 3 hatchlings were small shapes in the warm light, very still. "Ossel," she said carefully, "I need to show you something." She brought him to the archive and walked him through the old texts. He read slowly and did not interrupt. When he was done, he set the reader down and looked at the table between them. "You're telling me," he said, "that what they need isn't in the nursery." "I'm telling you what the old records say about hatchling behavior and what I've observed in the last 4 days," she said. "I'm a scientist. I'm telling you what I found." Ossel was quiet for a moment. "Vrail will not receive this well." "No," Len agreed. "Dorath will receive it even less well." "Also no." He stood up and straightened his jacket. "Where is Sol currently?" "Outer hull, panel cleaning on ring 7. Ossel picked up the archive reader, looked at it once more, and set it back down. "I'll need to make some calls," he said. Ring 7 of the outer hull was cold, and the work was slow. Darrow did not mind either. He moved along the panel line with a long-handled brush and a scraper, clearing the mineral deposits that built up on the sensor arrays during deep space transit. It was tedious work, and the magnetic tether suit was heavy, but the view through his visor was something no window on the interior of the ship could offer. Stars in every direction. The ship cutting silently through nothing. Out here it was just him and the hull and the dark, and that suited him fine. He had been trying not to think about the hatchlings. He had not been doing very well at it. He was working on a particularly stubborn patch of deposit near a sensor cluster when the tether line beside him went taut. He looked up. Another figure in a suit, moving along the hull toward him with the careful, deliberate steps of someone who did not come out here often. Ossel, recognizable even in the suit by the way he moved, a military straightness, even in magnetic boots. He stopped beside Darrow and pointed up at the surface of the hull and then toward the airlock. "Come inside." Darrow packed his brush and followed. The debrief room off the airlock was small and smelled like recycled air and metal. Ossel removed his helmet. Darrow removed his. Ossel handed him a towel from the bench and sat across from him. The hatchlings haven't eaten in 2.5 days, Ossel said. Darrow looked at the towel in his hands. High Matron Vrail has exhausted the standard interventions, Ossel continued. The attendants have tried every protocol. Nothing is working. I'm sorry to hear that, Darrow said. Is there anything I can? He stopped. He looked up. Oh. There's a proposal on the table, Ossel said. A temporary arrangement. You would work a maintenance shift on the nursery level each day. The hatchlings would be allowed access to the corridor outside the nursery during that time, under supervision. Darrow turned the towel over in his hands. I'm maintenance. I don't know anything about raising. No one is asking you to raise them, Ossel said. You would do your job, that's all. Darrow was quiet for a moment. Who else knows about this? High Matron Vrail, commander of the guard, Emperor Doras. Darrow stared at him. The Emperor knows my name. Ossel's expression did not change. He would like to meet you before any arrangement is confirmed. There was a long silence. Okay, Darrow said. The meeting was not what Darrow had expected, mostly because he had expected something formal, a throne room, maybe, or at least a large chair. Instead, it was a private chamber near the nursery level, modest by the standards of what he had seen of the imperial court. Vrail stood near the wall. Ossel was at the door. A Dracovari male he had never seen before stood at the center of the room. Emperor Dorath was very large and very old and very still. His scales were deep red, darkened with age to something close to black at the edges. He regarded Darrow the way mountains regard passing clouds, not with hostility, but with a kind of fundamental distance. Darrow stood in his work coveralls, his thermos in one hand, and waited. Dorath spoke. His voice came through the translation panel on the wall in flat, careful words. You understand the nature of what is being discussed? Yes, Darrow said. You have no formal qualifications related to hatchling care. No. You are a sanitation worker. Maintenance and sanitation, yes. A pause, and you have no explanation for why the hatchlings seek you out. Darrow thought about it honestly. No, I sit down, I do my work, they show up. I don't do anything with them specifically, I just don't. He paused. I don't make a fuss about them being there. I don't try to get them to do anything, I'm just there. Dorath looked at him for a long time. Darrow had the uncomfortable feeling of being measured against a scale he could not see. The arrangement will proceed, Dorath said finally, on a trial basis. You will be escorted to and from the nursery level. You will not interact with members of the court. You will report any unusual behavior immediately to Commander Ossel. Understood, Darrow said. Then, can I ask something? Dorath waited. Are there vents on this level that need cleaning? The filters on sublevel 9 were overdue, and if it's the same system here, the air quality. Vrail made a sound that was difficult to interpret. The vents, Dorath said slowly, will be made available to you. The arrangement began the next morning. Darrow arrived with his supply crate and a fresh bag of filter material. He set up in the corridor outside the nursery door and got to work on the ventilation cover, which was, as he had suspected, long overdue. The attendants brought the hatchlings out after 10 minutes. Rin came through the door first. She moved down the corridor at a fast walk, found Darrow on his knees with a screwdriver, and climbed onto his back without ceremony. He reached behind himself, adjusted his position so she wouldn't fall, and kept working. Bald went straight to the supply crate and climbed in. Sierra walked up to Darrow's left side and sat down. She watched his hands for a while. Then she pressed the side of her head gently against his arm and closed her eyes. One of the nursery attendants made a note on her clipboard. The hatchlings ate that evening, all 3 full portions. Vrail stood at the corridor window and watched Darrow pack up his crate at the end of his shift. He was counting filter brushes and muttering about supply orders. Rin was still on his shoulder. He eventually convinced her to get down by holding very still and waiting, and then stepping sideways slowly until she stepped off onto the corridor shelf on her own. He said something to her, low, quiet. The translation panel was off. Vrail did not know what he said. Rin watched him go. That night, Vrail sat in her room and did not sleep. She thought about the old word steadiness. She thought about what it looked like in practice. A human in work clothes, counting filter brushes, not asking anything from anyone. She thought about how easy it was to confuse authority with presence. How easy it was to build a system and forget what the system was supposed to do. She did not come to any conclusions. She just sat with it in the dark for a long time. Weeks passed. The ship moved through deep transit. Stars shifted slowly outside the long windows of the residential spire. The court continued its routines, meetings, meals, ceremonies that Darrow had no part in and no interest in attending. The hatchlings grew. Their scales deepened in color. Their movements became more deliberate, less stumbling. Rin began practicing short glides along the nursery corridor, landing badly most of the time and shaking herself off, and trying again with no apparent concern for dignity. Darrow came every morning. He worked his shift. He cleaned what needed cleaning, fixed what needed fixing, filed his supply requests, and ate his lunch in the corridor with 3 hatchlings orbiting him at various distances depending on their moods. The court observed all of this from a careful remove, through observation windows and second-hand reports, and said nothing about it publicly. Len was not observing from a remove. She was in the corridor most mornings with a notebook, which the hatchlings had decided was a fascinating object. Bolt in particular kept trying to sit on it. She had developed the habit of holding it at shoulder height while writing, which looked ridiculous and worked perfectly. She was tracking the developmental data carefully: vocalization complexity, spatial problem-solving, coordination milestones. The numbers were unusual, not wrong. The hatchlings were healthy in every measurable way, but ahead, consistently ahead of the charts that had been compiled across 6 generations of royal hatchlings. She had her theory. She was still building the evidence. On a morning in the 6th week, she was standing beside Darrow while he recalibrated a pressure gauge on the corridor wall. Rin was sitting on top of the gauge housing, watching the process with professional interest. Sierra was asleep against his ankle. Bolt had found a loose bolt and was carrying it around the corridor with great pride. Rin made a sound. It was not the usual rumble or the clicking noise she made when she wanted attention. It was something else: 2 tones, one rising, one falling, delivered with clear, deliberate intent. She looked directly at Darrow when she made it. Then she waited. Darrow looked at her. "Hey," he said. Rin made the sound again. 2 tones, same delivery, same direct look. Len had gone very still. Darrow went back to the pressure gauge. "Yeah, I see you. Hold on a second." Rin watched him finish the calibration. When he looked back at her, she made the sound once more and then settled, the way a creature settles when a thing has been accomplished. Len pulled Darrow aside at the end of the shift, while the attendants were collecting the hatchlings. "What she said to you," Len said, keeping her voice even. "That Teuton call, do you know what it is?" "She does it sometimes," he said. "I figured she was just making noise." Len shook her head. "It's in the old Dracavari communication records. Pre-language, pre-empire. It's a hatchling call. It means..." She paused, searching for the right words. "It means I see you, specifically directed to another individual, as in I recognize you as a real thing. A present thing. It's an acknowledgement call. It's the first form of intentional communication hatchlings developed before full language." Darrow looked at the end of the corridor where the attendants had gone. "She said that to me." "They're not supposed to be capable of that call for another 2 months at minimum," Len said. "And it has never, in any recorded case, been directed at a non-Dracavari." He was quiet for a moment. "What did I say back to her?" "You said, 'Yeah, I see you.'" He looked down at the pressure gauge in his hand. "Okay," he said, "then nothing else for a while." Len waited. She had learned to wait around Darrow. He thought at his own pace and would not be hurried. "I had a son," he said eventually. His voice was the same as always, quiet and level, back on Earth. He was sick for a long time, not something that could be fixed, just managed, and he was young enough that he didn't understand most of what was happening to him. Doctors, treatments, all of it, he didn't understand the words. He turned the gauge over in his hand. So I just sat with him when he was scared, when he was in pain. I couldn't explain anything. I couldn't fix anything, I just stayed. And after a while he would stop looking at me like he was frightened and start looking at me like he stopped. Like I was a known thing, like I was something that wasn't going to leave. He put the gauge in his crate. He died when he was 4. That was a long time ago. Len did not say anything for a moment. I don't know if that matters, Darrow said. It's the only thing that matters, she said. I think that's what they're finding in you, whatever that quality is. They know it without knowing what it's called. He picked up his crate. I'm going to write up my supply request. I've been waiting 3 weeks for the right filter brushes. She watched him go down the corridor, thermos swinging from his crate handle. That evening, Len brought her notes to Vrail directly. She laid out the developmental data, the vocalization event, the old texts. She did not dress it up or soften it. Vrail read everything. She sat at her desk in the nursery office and read it all twice while Len stood and waited. When she was done, she did not speak for several minutes. Then she rose, collected the documents, and walked down the hall to the Emperor's private office. She did not knock. She opened the door and set the papers on his desk and stood to the side and said nothing. Doras looked at her, then at the papers. He picked them up and began to read. Outside the viewport, the stars moved slowly past. Inside, the ship was very quiet. In the nursery down the hall, 3 hatchlings slept soundly for the first time in their lives, not because they had been managed or scheduled or enriched, but because tomorrow morning a door would open, and a man with a crate and a thermos would come down the corridor and sit down and be there. Dorath finished reading. He looked at the window for a long time. Find out his contract status, he said finally. The ceremony was held in the nursery itself, which had never been used for a ceremony before. There was no announcement, no court in attendance, no banners, no formal dress, no recorded address. Dorath had been specific about that. What happened in the nursery level stayed in the nursery level, at least for now. His advisors had suggested waiting until the ship reached port before making any formal decisions. Dorath had considered this and decided that waiting was a thing you did when you were unsure. He was not unsure. He was simply careful about the order of things. So it was just the 5 of them, Dorath, Vrail, Ossel, Len, and Darrow, standing in the corridor outside the nursery door on a Tuesday morning while the ship moved through transit, and the hatchlings pressed their noses against the observation window from the inside, watching. Darrow had not been told what was happening until that morning. Ossel had come to his quarters, knocked, and told him to come to the nursery level. Darrow had assumed something was wrong. He had brought his supply crate out of habit, realized halfway there that it was probably inappropriate, and left it in the corridor around the corner. He was standing in his work coveralls with his thermos in one hand, looking like a man who was trying very hard to be ready for something he did not understand. Dorath spoke. Ossel translated in a low voice beside Darrow's ear. Title being created was an old one. It had not been used since before the Empire. Its full name in Old Dracavari took 40 seconds to pronounce. The short form was Warden of the First Flame, which the translation panel rendered as the one the young trust before they know what trust is. It was technically a caretaking appointment, classified within the nursery staff structure. What it actually meant, what it had always meant in the old texts, was something closer to the adult the hatchlings chose. Dorath finished speaking. There was a pause. Darrow said thank you. He looked genuinely unsure what to do with his hands. I'm honored, really. Can I ask, does this change my maintenance duties? Vrail made a sound. It was the same difficult-to-interpret sound she had made in the Emperor's chamber weeks ago. Len had begun to suspect it was the Dracavari equivalent of a very long exhale through the nose. Your maintenance duties, Dorath said through the panel, remain your own. Good, Darrow said, because the filtration system on this level really does need a full inspection. I've been logging it for 2 months. Dorath extended his right claw. It was, Len understood, a deeply formal gesture, not a handshake, nothing close to a human handshake, but an extension of the forlim that in old Dracavari ritual meant, I accept the weight of this together with you. Darrow looked at it, then looked at Len. She made a small go-ahead gesture with her eyes. He shifted his thermos to his left hand and shook Dorath's claw. Dorath held very still for a moment, the way he had held still in every important moment Len had seen him in. Then he stepped back, and the ceremony, such as it was done. The nursery door opened. 3 hatchlings came out in a rush. Rin went directly to Darrow's shoulder. Bolt hit his boots at speed and sat on them with great satisfaction. Sierra walked up, looked at him carefully, and made the Teuton call, I see you, and then went to investigate the supply crate he had left around the corner, which she had apparently known about the entire time. Life aboard the Sovereign Ember continued. In the months that followed, the court began to notice things about the 3 hatchlings that had no clear explanation. Their speech development came early. Their coordination was sharp. When disputes arose between them, which was often, they resolved quickly. Rin would back down or Bolt would defer, and they would move on without the prolonged territorial displays that the imperial records listed as normal for this age. They were curious. They were calm. They were, by every developmental measure, ahead. The imperial scholars argued quietly among themselves. Diet theories, environmental factors, the particular star system they had transited. One wrote a long paper about gravitational influence on scale development that no one could quite follow. Len wrote her own paper. It was filed under Xenobiology, subcategory Environmental Enrichment, and its abstract was careful enough that no one reading quickly would find the thing it was actually about. She did not name Darrow in the abstract. She named the conditions: consistent presence, calm routine, absence of expectation. She let the data speak. Ossel, for his part, kept his records clean and his descriptions plain. His log entry for the morning of the appointment read the same as any other maintenance log on the ship. Room accessed, work performed, parties present, no incident. What he added to his personal notes, which no one would ever read, was this: the Empire spent 200 years building a system to raise its future leaders correctly. The hatchlings ignored it completely, found a corridor on sublevel 9, and made their own decision. In 6 weeks, they were ahead of every benchmark we have ever set. I'm not sure what we are supposed to do with that. He had not answered his own question. He did not expect to. Darrow finished the filtration inspection on the nursery level in the 2nd week of his new appointment. He filed the report, filed the supply request, and went back to his other work. He visited the corridor on sublevel 9 sometimes, on the long night shifts, because it was quiet and the pipes were warm. He sat against the wall with his thermos and thought about things, about his son, about sitting with someone who cannot tell you what they need and deciding to stay anyway. He never came to any large conclusions. He was not that kind of person. He just drank his coffee in the quiet and did his job, and in the morning he went back up to the nursery level where 3 small shapes were already waiting at the door. The Dracavari had crossed 40 star systems looking for power worth respecting. It had been sitting in a maintenance corridor the whole time, with a mop and a thermos, asking nothing of anyone, and always, without fail, staying until the small ones fell asleep.